Taste.
Look.
Smell. Tree.
Bird. Bell. Touch.
Taste.
Look.
Smell.
Tree.
Fish.
Bird.
Bell. So do as the poet says and listen.
And listen.
And listen. And listen. And listen.
And listen.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Advanced Research Centre, welcome to the 13th of the Rose Open Days Festival, to day 2. My name is Stephen Sheriff, I am the Events and Development Coordinator at Glasgow Building Preservation Trust, and we've been coordinating the festival since 1990. Some of you I recognise this will be your 4th event, and so please forgive me as you hear this for the 4th time, perhaps you can repeat it yourself. The festival happens in every region in Scotland, coordinated by the Trust. So I encourage you to get out and about and find out what else is on around you. We're very grateful to the University of Glasgow for hosting us here at the Arc for the 2nd year in a row. And I'd like to say a really huge thank you to Cassie Dillon and Zara Gladman, who have been working alongside me helping to coordinate it here. The Arc is the home of collaborative research at the University of Glasgow and works to bring researchers, partners and ideas together from across the campus, the city and beyond. The ground floor, where we are now, is open to the public year-round and hosts a wide range of events and projects inspired by the university's research. You can scan the QR code at the door on the way out and sign up to the mailing list and find out what's on in the building all through the year. There's also quite often some free sandwiches around about, so I encourage you to come down. The Arc this weekend is host to Explorathon, which is a free programme of events showcasing some of the amazing research that happens in this building. So you can come and see some of that the weekend. Glasgow Rose Open Days Festival, we have a huge programme of events this year. About 250, 270, including all the guided trails on the digital programme. So if you've logged onto the website and the event you were hoping to go to is now fully booked, don't be discouraged. Please do look at that no booking necessary category and the in-person events category, where there are tons of events that you can book, or you can't book, you don't need a booking to go along to. I'd like to say a really huge thank you to our funders, to Glasgow City Council and to Glasgow City Heritage Trust, to our sponsor Denton's, and to all of the sponsors who make this event possible and keep it free. Thank you to our amazing volunteers who welcomed you this evening, without whom the event would not be possible. If you do feel like making a donation to help us keep the event free, you can do so by texting Doors Open to 785, it's on the screen behind me. Text costs £5 plus one standard rate message. And you can also make a cash donation using the donation buckets at the door on the way out. And we're also able to make cash donations if you're so inclined. I do hope that you enjoy the event this evening. We really want to know what you think. We have a visitor survey which is available on the homepage of our website. We have a flyer which one of our volunteers will be able to give you on the way out. There's a QR code on the front of the flyer, and that links you to our website. And there is a £100 prize for a Glasgow local business of your choice. No? Okay, we'll get there later. In the unlikely event of a fire alarm, please exit through the door behind you and across the foyer in the fire exit. Okay, on to tonight's event. I'm very pleased to introduce Glasgow Building Preservation Trust Director, David Cook. Absolutely. Well, we're delighted so many of you could join us tonight for the first showing of It'll Be Great When It's Finished, which is a film we have recently prepared. So last year, Glasgow Building Preservation Trust turned 40. And like humans at that age, it was a time for looking backwards and looking forward as well. And as part of our celebrating, we wanted to make a film, but we didn't want it to be some sort of dry, comfort video telling beautiful women, of course. We wanted to try and reflect on why we were funded, where Glasgow was then, how our story mirrored the story of the city, where we have been, where Glasgow has been, and importantly where we're all going. So without falling into kind of nostalgia, as a child I have very strong memories of being driven around Glasgow and seeing tenements being demolished. The exposed walls, the side of tenements, wallpaper hanging off, and stairs running up and down the former close walls with fireplaces on view. Glasgow being dismantled in my childhood. And this is where our film starts. So we're about to watch the film, and then we have got afterwards a great panel who will introduce to talk about the film and Glasgow and where we're living. So hope you enjoy it, and if we can stick on the film, thank you.
Glasgow is a city that has never been afraid to reinvent itself. For better or worse, change has often been the only constant as city landmarks and lifestyles have come and gone. In 1982, the city was slowly emerging from a long, painful period of deindustrialisation and population loss. Since the Second World War, almost half of Glasgow citizens had moved away in the search for work or a better life, some leaving Scotland altogether. Others had been relocated to the new towns of Cumbernauld or East Kilbride, where fresh air and shiny new buildings promised much. The city, on the other hand, was littered with abandoned factories and yards, soot-blackened tenements, schools, and other public buildings originally built to serve a growing Victorian workforce that no longer existed. Demolition had become the order of the day. The 29 comprehensive development areas declared across the city in the 1950s and 60s had seen huge change to the urban fabric. And even as clearance in these areas slowed down, there were still huge road-building programmes being pushed ahead at breakneck speed. Community consultation was an alien concept, and the city's planners forged ahead with large-scale regeneration, untroubled by the views of the families who lived in the very areas targeted for redevelopment. Many Glaswegians welcomed what they saw as signifiers of change and progress. Still, there were those who mourned the loss of so many buildings and the impact on the communities sacrificed for the motorway network and river crossings that carved the city into pieces. One building that narrowly escaped its death sentence was the Brigate Fish Market on the north bank of the River Clyde. Named for the nearby bridge gate that once controlled the flow of people into the city centre, the Brigate was erected in 1873 to designs by architects Clark and Bell, and several times enlarged until it occupied an area in excess of 5,000 square yards. At its light-filled heart, a spacious market hall through which, by the early 1900s, over 1 million packages of fish passed through. In use for its original purpose for over 100 years, the Brigate was closed in 1977, when the fish market was moved to Blockhairn, and by 1980, the building with its delightful stone winged seahorses was in jeopardy.
There was a planning application put in for demolition. There was a few people in Glasgow who didn't want that to happen, and they mobilised a group of interested folk to start objecting to that planning application. They came up with a scheme that was for restoring the building and using it for artisans and craftspeople. The Bridgegate Trust was then formed and chaired by a man called George Dunlop. And he brought together a lot of people that were very well known in the city from a commercial background that could help us put together a scheme that would be self-sustaining. At the time when these people were all getting together, there wasn't a huge movement for heritage in Glasgow, and so they had to create that momentum. We were looking at the Brigade. It was very much part of that. Let's refurbish Glasgow, let's promote it as a place for people to come and visit. It was meant to be a multi-storey car park. That didn't happen. We preserved the building for Glasgow. When the Trust constitution was written, it was agreed that the buildings that we would look at would be wider than the Brigade, that it would become a resource for Glasgow. So we moved on from that particular project to do other things.
In 1991, the Bridgegate Trust became Glasgow Building Preservation Trust, its mission to preserve and repurpose the city's built heritage. Since then, the Trust has worked right across the city on a variety of projects, returning many important historic buildings to communities large and small. Castlemilk Stables was built around 1794 by the Stirling Stewart family, whose ancestral home was Castleton Tower, and around which was built the baronial Castlemilk House. The stable block, with its courtyard arrangement and cupola-topped clock tower, was an unashamed monument to the family's fortunes and status. The stable block was used as a growing space until the late 1980s, when it was boarded up and abandoned. A fire in 1994 seemed set to be the death knell for this once beautiful Georgian building.
I've been on that board for 40 years. I live in the community, and that was one of the things that made us fight to save this building. The impact on the renovation of the building for the local community was fantastic. When we told them what was going to happen, what we were going to do once the building was renovated and the building was theirs. There's never been a piece of graffiti or damage to this building, and it's been open since 2007. So it shows the community care about it. And it's busy every day in the week.
I've lived in Castlemilk all my life. I vaguely remember sort of Castlemilk House and that being here, but I more remember the stable sitting derelict. It always said private, no trespassing on it, so it was nicknamed the Private within the area. But they had a plant nursery and they would grow plants for the district council. Like every other young one then, we all kind of sneaked in the hole in the fence and took a couple of plants home. When I seen it starting to get developed, I just thought, my God, I thought they were going to just take the whole front away and it was all going to go. But when I seen what they were doing with it and then I seen the result, and to be inside that building is just amazing to think of where it was. And I think for me, even although I'm born and bred in Castlemilk, it made me want to find out more.
So the objectives were to do something for the community, and I think we've actually done that. It was a pile of rubble, and to see it now, and then winning the best building in Scotland award, you don't get many places that get that in a housing estate.
I'm getting ready to go on the board of directors now. This place has done wonders for me. It's made me who I am today. It's given me back the life that I had before I took ill, and I owe them everything.
Historic buildings that are considered for renovation projects were originally built to last, to stand the test of time. And when they fall into disrepair, it's usually because the purpose around which they were designed is no longer required. Almost always, new, viable, sustainable end uses must be found before restoration can begin. Renovation projects that restore historic buildings in fulfilment of their original purpose are relatively rare. Galvin Grove Bandstand was built in 1924 and could hold up to 3,000 spectators. A wide variety of acts graced the stage, from comedy and big bands to ballroom dancers and bagpipers. With punk in the 70s and pop in the 80s, the bandstand continued to draw crowds. By 1992, the deteriorating condition of the amphitheatre provoked calls to close it, but a long campaign by the community eventually saw an approach to Glasgow Building Preservation Trust in 2011. The Trust completed the project in 2014 in time for the Commonwealth Games.
It was great having awesome audiences, but I think, you know, there's a lot of venues you go in and you go down the stairs and you're in the basement and they're quite similar, and like something like the bandstand, something that's got a bit of history in it, that looks amazing, that looks like it's been there forever. I love the fact that it's in the middle of the park. The summer you walk through, and even when there's no shows on, it's a great place to just chill out. But then it's transformed at night and you've got all these legendary bands playing in it. We've never played the bandstand, and it's actually on my bucket list as a place to play. So I'm chuffed that tonight I'm going to take that off.
I just always love open air venues in general. It feels so much more intimate almost.
Yeah, it's definitely really nice that it's been preserved, because you see a lot of these kind of old bandstands in other places, they've just got graffiti all over them and they go unused.
It gives it a bit more prestige that it's a historic building and it's been saved. I feel that obviously shows people value it and are proud of it.
Heritage projects have the capacity to capture the imagination and become cornerstones for community building and renewal, creating new spaces and places and stimulating regeneration. But the significant impact comes at a price, a continuing and growing challenge for the sector.
I think the funding landscape's changed quite seismically, really, in the last 3 or 4 decades. The biggest impact has been the lottery, without a doubt, mainly because of the amount of money it's brought to the table for heritage projects, but actually as well because you have to really work with the community. You have to show how you're engaging, and you have to show what those outputs are going to be. Funding, to my mind, has by no means kept pace with the demand and the extent of the problem, and the fact that building projects now are so much more costly to do.
Despite the challenges, there remain projects in development across Glasgow being championed by community and cultural organisations. For those pursuing historic restoration projects, these buildings are steeped in memories and stories. They're anchors to a place and time, the value of which cannot be underestimated. One building that hopes to be rescued from the at-risk register soon is Whitevale Baths in the east end of the city. First opened in 1902, the new facility included separate men's and women's swimming pools, hot baths and showers, and a steamy wash house with 66 washing stalls. Sadly, the pools were closed in the 1970s, and the buildings began to deteriorate rapidly. The pool and steamy parts of the building were finally demolished in 2015. Glasgow Building Preservation Trust are working with Peak and Glasgow City Council to investigate if the building can be repaired and upgraded for use by the community.
Peak is a children's charity based in the East End of Glasgow, but we operate across the city. We support children, young people and families impacted by poverty and inequality. Actually, before a large part of it was demolished, I used to have a Gallagate tenants hall. So from the age of 5, 6, I used to come along to that with my granny when she went to go and vote in the polling station, when they had their wee bingo nights and their community fun days and gala days. And so this is very important for us, that we keep that old aspect and the history and the heritage of Whitevale Baths. So when we're developing the building, we want to keep as much of the heritage as possible, in addition to building onto the footprint of the building and making it more modern. But it's important people don't forget what Gallagate used to be like 100 years ago and how we build it into the future.
A lot of residents would probably like to see something happening, because it's been lying like that and it's just obviously decaying now. My granny used to stay in the Blue Vale flats, so we used to go in there when she was taking her laundry in, and we would get into swimming baths. I just remember the old cubicles, a lot of old memories in there.
All buildings are vehicles for storytelling. Glaswegians do love sharing their memories of yesteryear, and so it's no surprise that an annual opportunity to open the doors of the city has been a staple of the cultural calendar for 34 years and counting.
When I started Doors Open Day, the concept was really simple. We basically said to people, can you open your door? Can you make people feel welcome? Can you make people feel there are no barriers, there's no otherness, there's no exclusivity? It grew and grew, and you found you had almost a club of building baggers, as we called them, that would come every year and get 7 one year and then look for those buildings, have them ticked off, look for the next.
Civic events play an important role in providing a platform for discussion about regeneration of the city, a discussion that has rumbled on for generations.
The main quality and need for delivering a project over the 40 years is, in my view, tenacity and doggedness. Just keep at it the whole time. People come and go. It needs, at the end of the day, the community to find its own lead on these things. It's a long, long, long gestation period from the point of finding a building and then assembling the idea and the funding and the design genius, usually, that comes to make that building something else.
Our plans for the Brigade was always that it was going to be in 2 phases. The first phase was in 2009 to create those artist studios and those offices that were going to be the viable business use for sustaining this space. But the intention was that phase 2 would always come soon after that. It's actually taken us 14 years to work out what is the viable use for these other halls, and also to find the right funders that come along at the right time for those uses. The legacy of this building is that, it was always meant to be market halls. We've looked at different uses for this space. Where we've actually come back to eventually is that its best purpose is a market hall. That's what we're trying to do with this project, is remain true to what the original purpose for this space was.
Change will continue to be the constant in Glasgow's development. As we move forward, we need to nurture a deeper and ongoing connection between the city's assets, its culture, its communities, and its heritage.
When we started with the Brigade and the other projects around Glasgow, there was a large network of people that all were like-minded and that they were working together to promote the city. I think there is an important role for the Trust to play in coordinating across the sectors in Glasgow to try and bring together a more cohesive approach to the restoration and heritage of our city. I hope that we can regain that aspiration that culture and heritage and quality of life is the way to bring Glasgow's fortunes back again.
I think some folk look at heritage, the word even, or preservation, which is in our title, as something that's a kind of backward thing. It's not cool, it's not the future. But the way I see our heritage is very much that this is like an extraordinary gift that we've been given by people from the past. So I think the lesson of the past is actually something we should be grabbing with both hands to propel us to a better future for the city.
During an interview in the early 1980s about the regeneration of Glasgow, the Scottish comedian Craig Ferguson was asked what he thought about the city. He answered, "It'll be great when it's finished."
I'd like to invite up 3 people to talk about the film and about Glasgow. And they're all very involved in the development of the city today. I'll briefly introduce them last meeting. First of all, Jerry Grant, who's an architect and urbanist with 360 architecture. He's worked in private and public practice all over the city and beyond, both designing buildings in Glasgow and shaping public policy. Notably with a stint as city design leader, so an involvement in heritage. Most recently, Jerry was one of the leads for a new vision for the Golden Z, Street, which is very current, and he's involved in teaching and has often been involved in cultural organisations. Secondly, we have Rafa Esposito, who is an architect and urban designer as well. He's the city design manager for Glasgow City Council. He's not here representing the council. He's also chair of Glasgow's Urban Design Panel. Born and studying in Italy, Rafa has worked in private and public sectors internationally. He acts as leading designer for, has acted as leading designer for major regeneration, master planning in public places, and provides design advice to the City Council and planning. Like Jerry, he's also involved in teaching. He's a wide view, including art, landscape, economics, and political sciences. And last by no means least, Paola Piscino is an architect and urban designer, principal officer also for city centre strategy for Glasgow City Council, and has been at the forefront of developing and delivering urban regeneration and economic revitalisation for the city. She focuses on city centres, particularly post-COVID recovery, transition to net zero, has also been involved in a lot in arts and cultural organisations, and relatively recently became a doctor in social and environmental factors affecting the quality of life. Most recently, or currently, is involved in the George Square revitalisation and the Avenues projects, which are ongoing to revitalise the city centre. And when we were pulling together the panel, I didn't think the architects would think it. The reason I invited the three of them is because they think relevant, not relevant. So can I invite you to come up and take your seats? And we can turn on the microphones as well. So I'll ask you in a minute your kind of reflections on the film, which I don't think any of you had watched before we came, which is good, because you'll be fresh to you like it is to the audience. But to kick us off, I remember someone describing the difference between Glasgow and Edinburgh. They said that Edinburgh was a rational city, as a medieval core, and then they built the Georgian Newtown. And the city was building outwards but retaining the past. And Glasgow, it was said, was like a spoiled toddler. Every 30 to 40 years, just knock everything down, win blocks, toddler's floor, and rebuild the city. Sometimes it feels like that when you look back in the history. Cities are always changing, so my first question really to you is, as well as what did you make for the film, is should we just let cities change? And how can we hold on to, as Liz said, these gifts from the past and allowing the city to keep evolving as it always will? I don't know if Jerry's got the mic in his hand, so we're going to kick off. Can you hear me? Yes. Interesting. I thought it was a lovely little film, actually. I found it quite amazing at one point because I might not look at it, I'm a man of a certain age, and I was one of the children who were born in Glenhill when we were knocking down. There was an aerial shot of George's Cross and Charing Cross, and I was one of those kids that were moved to a new town, which was urban, actually, wasn't mentioned in the film. So I sort of go way back in terms of my sort of history of Glasgow and bringing it up to date, as they said, working in Golden Eggs. I think I've been very privileged in my career to work on many projects and see the city transform through many phases. And I think, in a way, the title of the film, Ultimately Finished, is a misnomer in the sense that cities are never finished. It's a fallacy to think that it's a finished object and will continue changing all the time. And I think the challenges that we all have, or we've had with our jobs in our rates, is how cities change and the forces of change are continually affecting how we live economically, culturally, socially. And I think it's quite difficult sometimes for cities to keep up. And I think quite often that is frustration. I think we quite often get, whether it be an architect or designer or somebody that pays your council tax and wants to see things happen. So I think the rate of change is such, and certainly in the last couple of years, I think it's been quite a dramatic shift. And it's accelerated a lot of things, and I think it's difficult. I think the frustrations having worked within the city council and then with the city and working for the city on projects, being two sides of the table, it's always been quite interesting. And it is difficult, and after tell you this, in terms of just how difficult it is to make things change. But the cities aren't very reactive when it comes to allowing things to happen quickly. So I'm very optimistic, as David says. I've always been. I think the thing about Glasgow is that it's a city full of possibilities. I never see anyone as a city full of possibilities. Edinburgh is as near as you can get to a city that is complete.
But I think the idea that Glasgow is, and having taught in school, that it's a wonderful place to live, and it is full of imagination and opportunity, and in a way, the frustrations that we have about it and those things that we see that we don't like about it, I think gives it its currency, and I think it's very much a city that has huge creative underbelly to it, and lots of people, and you see in the film when Liz and Eleanor talk about go together. The grassroots of this city, the communities, the people that galvanise to save Dublin Hill Baths, Springburn, Winter Garden, or it's about people, and it has to happen from the ground up, because from the top down it's a very difficult task. So I'm hugely optimistic, and I think the film just takes that story of it's constantly changing, and we have wonderful assets to try and cherish our opportunities, and we shouldn't think of it as being something that's holding us back.
Thanks, Jerry. I mean, maybe I kicked it off wrong by mentioning our lovely city to the east. We compare ourselves sometimes to our nearest neighbours, but at the end of the day, we're an international city with international problems, and both of you are kind of grappling with these things. Particularly as we recover, the economy recovers, and people recover from COVID, and the city has changed rapidly in the last 2 or 3 years. I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit about that, and why we should really be caring for our historic assets within that context. Yeah?
So for me, being Italian, everything is stuff, and I also think that the history of the hospitality of people that have lived, and sometimes we take risks, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. But to me, this is fast. In Italy, we usually take 30 years, and then we should. So in terms of changing fast, and it has been really very fast, as Jerry said, especially COVID and the impact of COVID has got a lot of change, and we've seen the change in the city center. We've seen how the city center has become very empty during COVID. It has shown not to be. We've seen other areas of the city that have become the shock of the pandemic much better, and that was mostly the city center. And so we're working very hard to bring people into the city center. And one of the main characteristics of the city center is its heritage is really the DNA of the city center, and is the reason why people out of the city center. So it's very important. In terms of the culture, there is also another aspect during the emergency. All policy looking to support innovation among business and find new uses for business. Offices don't seem to be working as well anymore. We need to living, staying in the city center. So we have to find new ways to get problems into it and
Okay. Yeah. I think there's a lot of change in the moment. We've got a lot of development going on. And I was actually at one of the Golden Z's consultations, and was put at a table with property developers, which is sometimes a place I find comfortable. And one of them said, and this is a quote, he said, well, I'm not going to build a 20-storey tower and there's a listed building next to it. We should just get over ourselves and go really. And I'm afraid I had to leave and go home from dinner. They didn't want to reach across and grab me by the tie and put them on the table. But I think we've got also good development pressures. The commercial world wants and needs to invest. Glasgow needs that investment. But we've got issues where people want to build higher buildings, and maybe the massing and the scale of the city is affected. Is there something we should be doing about that, or should we let the city develop and emerge as cities globally do?
Interesting. Thank you. You let me the beautiful one. No, just a second. I want to go back on the change. I generally that your cities are organic and dynamic entities, and as such, change is embedded into the very idea. City cannot exist without change. So therefore, change is good, change is welcome. What, of course, is important is the reason for the change, is how to deliver a change that brings back values. In this case, it's actually not about winning values. So keep saying, the demand I'm supposed to respond to is value engineering. People that are working with me, they know that I keep insisting on shift. Instead of value engineering, let's engineering the values. Heritage is very much part of that. Without heritage, there is no future. The heritage is in the identity. And there is no sustainable growth, change, if it's not based on preserving and enhancing what the role of heritage is in cities, in cities. This point of view, Glasgow is challenging. You're right, you pointed out the fact that Glasgow is facing one of those very, very symptomatic moments in history where actually the city is changing at speed. Let me remind you, mentioned taller buildings. It is a very visible part of the change that Glasgow is going through. Let's remind ourselves that for Georgia, Victorians were mad building buildings that were not needed for the city. And then for Victorians, successive stages of development, organic growth of the city were seen as improving. Modernist times have brought, people is absolutely horrendous, with big towers and empty spaces. For the people instead, it was a very important moment in time. We need you to judge them. But now we are witnessing another one of those moments. Economic dynamics are what are underlying any change in any city. The relation between the land value, structural cost, and other aspects are demanding an increase of scale. This increase of scale not necessarily needs to push with heritage. We have hundreds of cities, not from this, soon called me out when I say reality. We have cities which are illustrating that modern responses can coexist, and can add value to very sensitive environment. Heritage is actually you walk through a city in Europe, in many of Europe, and you breathe history, you experience history, and then all of a sudden you do have contemporary design, contemporary insertion in these fields, and they are not in any way dissonant, they are not in any way bothering you. You see that as a good example of healthy, sustainable evolution. So the question is the quality of what we are inserting. What actually is good enough to be part of this situation? So from this point of view, the main question that we need to ask ourselves is what moves, what changes are we making today which are going to be worthy of representing the listed buildings of tomorrow? That is the most important question. And that's the filter that we are applying or easier said than done. The economic dynamic they're really, really bullish. This is not a place like Paris or Barcelona that can afford very high land value, major development yields, people that are actually investing in quality. I'm afraid to burst this bubble. We are not in that situation. Edinburgh is Glasgow still needs to find it to quality. The good thing, sure. The good thing is that there are people that are increasingly committed to recognize heritage as a nice badge to them. I save a building, I'm cool. And that, in a nutshell, that is a very good thing. Call it, if you like, call it a more relativism. Heritage is regaining place in how the people are deciding to spend their and with it, consciously indeed. Sorry for that.
No, that's fine. I think one of the things that's apparent to us is, we've been going 40 years, we've done about 50 buildings, and that's good going. There are still approaching 100 buildings in the building list register, in the city listed buildings. So at the pace that we've been able to work for 4 decades, there's still going to be lots and lots of work. So it can't just be the charity, it can't just be the city, it has to be everybody. And I think one of the things we need to find is how do we engage the private sector to do the right things and encourage them. But one of the things I really like about the film, which one we maybe move on to, is Eleanor talks about the fact that there was a moment in Glasgow where it felt like culture, heritage and well-being for people were the drivers for Glasgow economically. And I want to ask you the question, is that still the case? And if it isn't, then how do we get back to that? Because it felt like from the Garden Festival through the 90s into the early 2000s, there was a common culture and creative industries and new jobs will help drive the city's change. And I don't know if it feels like that anymore. So I don't know, Jerry, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that time, started an official career in the early 80s, but at that time it did feel an incredible place to be, and people from all over Europe and other parts of the world were coming to Glasgow to see what we're doing. And part of that, I think, it was just that, as David said, just that whole thing of, like the Merchant City, for example, that was something I was involved in the and that was stimulated by the idea that Merchant City didn't exist, per se, until a point in time when, at a sort of government level, we were planning legislation and changes that were made that allowed the conversion of buildings into change of uses. So a lot of the warehouse buildings in Merchant City were converted into residential, and there was fiscal stimulus given to that, which gave developers, small private developers, people like Cantel and the Borough Company, people who were given amounts of money investment per unit that they created. Unit. But what it did at that time was it allowed people to say, I'm going to take that and save that. And the Albion buildings, on Albion Street and England Street, we were the first warehouse building in the city to be converted into residential. And that's in to buy a flat for £1,000. So, but what it did was it allowed small developers, people with just energy and drive to say, right, we're going to take this on. And out of that came England Square, and out of that then came Glasgow Court, and then out of that came the Italian Centre, and then out of that came something else. And it created this momentum of developers and some of the best architects in the city of that time to be creative, and they were allowed to be creative. And it created a buzz, and that in then turn created things like allowed drones to fly in Norway, with a resident population, and so all of those things, it was all the small things that this change, but it took people with gumption, as Eleanor and Liz were saying, it took the drive, people and communities and local people to say, this is what we need to do. And it's no different. But the point I'm trying to make, and it's been interesting just looking at the council over the last 6 months, is similar issues. I feel that there's a time Glasgow's at a tipping point. I was saying it's that post-COVID. There's things that have stalled, there's things that have accelerated. There's an opportunity now to really do something really creative. The difficulty the city has is that a lot of the historic buildings in the city centre are not owned by the city. The city don't own very much property. So private landlords, people that own buildings, can sit on the asset and move because we're moving what would be the value of that land. And I think that has to change, because I think, and that has to change the government, the Scottish government. I don't know what it's like in Edinburgh. I think in Edinburgh is vast. There is a very different story, because it's the capital city. But in Glasgow, a lot of the city centre buildings like Lion Chambers, Egyptian halls, we all know who they are. We have no control, and the city has to be able to take control and allow, whether or not it's a transfer or sale of an asset to a community group or to other groups to say, if you want to do this, then take it. And a really good example of this recently is Love Loan, which is on the edge of George Square, being under the Stewart Group, which is a cluster of listed buildings, parish halls on George Street. and some exquisitely crafted contemporary buildings that are being done. And it is it's probably a major bit of regeneration, I think, important bit of major regeneration in the city centre, which involves historic buildings over the last 20 years. And it's been done in an exquisite quality. And it's a quite it took us a long time to get that together. There was a will behind it to do it. He didn't have any operators. He said, I'm going to save these buildings, especially for the employed people who wanted to work. He's driven the project. And we need more of it. We need lots more people like that. So, really what I'm trying to say, part of it is down to leadership. A lot of it is down to individuals, whether it's in the council, or it's in the private sector, or it's at government level, or it's in the creative sector, because we all know these people are that are going to drive these things forward. It can't be left to one individual to do it. It can't be left to the council to do it. It has to be up to the people that are going to drive these things. So I think there are possibilities to do this thing. I mean, there are new things happening, but it's a lot of work. It's a really nice thing.
Yeah, and I'm going to mention, because I agree that it's, particularly, of course, the health of the city. You're right, there's been massive, but there is one aspect there that I should share with you, because the success of that intervention has been the capability on every perspective to be flexible and to truly try to understand what was the threshold between conservation of the heritage asset and evolution. And that's a very, very important conversation, because the way we approached it is that working closely with the consultant was that, of course, the conservation of that asset, specifically that asset, needed a degree of flexibility to be adapted, to allow the asset to change, retaining its identity, but to change and to face a different future. And this is something that, unfortunately, not always in the past has been done, because the evolution of historical asset has been seen perhaps in a more conservative way, crystallizing the asset, and that is something that actually heritage doesn't need. You were mentioning Italy, I thought it would be time. It takes some time to take some. But the good thing, being Italian, when I say it this way, I've learned one thing, that heritage needs to evolve. In Italy, often there are architects or planners working in a building that is got 1,500 years of history, yet you can see the evolution of that asset through centuries. And then it's still there because people have been around to actually evolve that asset. And that is a very, very important concept. The statement is actually a demonstration for that asset is not going to lose, retain its identity, brings back into the community and into use an heritage asset, but evolving with a degree of communication. Last but not least, I think that there is one message in this video that is key. That's why I fell in love. That reminds me exactly when I fell in love with Glasgow. That was before the Commonwealth Games, when Glasgow City Council, don't mention that there's no one from Glasgow City Council there. If there is, don't touch the head. Glasgow City Council decided to blow buildings. Glasgow, that is the very moment I fell in love, and I felt that I was in the right place at the right time. Plus, Vision raised their voice and say, sorry, Glasgow City Council, no, we are not having that. That is cunts. Please stop. Brilliant. This is exactly what this city needs and what this city needs. As Visions. Raise your voice, be active, be proactive. Your voice, embracing your voice, you will create a political demand that will force, that will result into technical, political, and economic responses to these challenges. And that is fundamental. So it's not down to us or to you, it's down to us, the citizens of Glasgow, the government, and the nation is achieved.
Thank you. That was a run. Thank you. Listen, we can take questions from the audience, but yeah.
change or stimulate culture? Well, I think it's really, but importantly, to do innovation. We have cultural institutions such as the one that was tonight, and they are really changing that. We're bringing people, real people to like solve innovation and so part of the offer. And that also changes the concept in terms of what, how the pandemic will stuff. And hopefully, security for sure is going to be the innovation sector, which is also what we if there is something, if people want to come to Glasgow because Glasgow couldn't stick with that they offer culture or innovation, then there is a reason why we have been impactful. So innovation, yet again, is making changes.
I think sometimes if you read the papers, Glasgow's in decline and everything's been difficult. And yes, it's tough economic times, but the city has always responded in those economic times in the past, and so we've got to look to the opportunities, and these are assets, city centre. I think the word that's coming through a lot is bravery, and the city being braver and people being braver with how they treat buildings. I mean, we're very conscious that words like preservation and conservation makes you sound like you're building museums. We're not building museums, we're repurposing old buildings to new life. I think it's important to remember. I was just making an ask of the audience. You've got time to think of a question, but in the meantime, I'm going to ask you, Paula, to just tell us a bit more about what does a post-retail city centre look like, and do we want it? Will we enjoy it? What opportunities does it bring to us?
That's a big question because it's just happening. It's just done to me for not to really to understand what is actually shift of the way how retail works and time just to go shopping or to go shopping. And so how do we keep attracting people to the city center if the retail has changed? There's nothing that the city council can do. The retail has changed. Everybody's behavior and different and so on and so forth. So there's not we cannot bring back the city center to what it was before the pandemic. That's something that we've all understood very clearly. So how do we move on? Well, one of the first moves is certainly to bring people to live in the city center and touch on this. The other move is to be flexible and to experiment, to be able to say, okay, we don't exactly know what's going to be next in 10 years, so let's try, let's experiment, let's see what works. And then create more experiences in the city center. I am responsible for the city center strategy, and in my team we are delivering a huge program of public. And city center is attractive where people can freely, and where people can cycle, where people can walk, where people don't have to negotiate with us so much, and where we can briefly or green or nature-based solutions so that people can actually live and enjoy a sustainable and pleasant environment. So there are a lot of middle steps and a lot of experimenting. I am not being at the stage to say exactly what the city center is going to be years, but hopefully a place that is very vibrant with culture, and rich cultural offer, and with places to live, different people, so we can manage as city center and with families, and with the services that support such families that are going to come into the city center, and a real city where everything happens.
Just maybe now got an opportunity, I think, to ask a few questions. So, I think Stephen.
And mine is a bit of a sort of take back to demolishing anything. That any time it is before the demolition, people ask the question as to why it's being demolished. Recently, there's a slightly not a house, which was described as Glasgow's 3 buildings, which brings us to the question about beauty and what is beautiful and how does beauty tie into heritage, which brings us into the question of what is heritage and when does it need to define heritage for you? And then just one last comment was David, you mentioned that sitting next to a development, so the 20-story building next to a listed building. That's exactly what we've done offline. So it is possible, it's just having the right people.
I think in that case it was an attitude to development that was bugging me. I'm not opposed to tall towers. I think that we managed to get them and I was quite surprised at the height of the tower because of the land is graded, it actually fits in and doesn't overshadow the heritage asset, which is astonishing. It's going to be one of the favourite buildings people have in the city. You asked about 4 questions there, which are very greedy, but I don't know. I'm not going to pick up what is heritage. I think it's another talk. But there's things you want to hear and wants to kind of respond to there.
What is heritage? Because I believe we can consider heritage when it's in the heart of people today. In terms of membership, we are also as well. So there are different aspects. When is it going to demolish and when is it not? In the case of galleries, for example, the idea of it staying in the city, really at the outdoor open space where people can enjoy walking through the city again, and considering the fact that the current layout of the galleries doesn't lend itself to conversion. So there's a lot of factors that we need to take into consideration, whilst also always thinking about saving as much time as possible. In the case of playhouse, it's not completely close to my heart, I must say. But certainly planning and if you put out people can get back to us actually you might and then the conversation talking to people.
That citizen action that you were talking about was evident in the saving of the Brigade, and it's still evident and possible today with the don't demolish those buildings live on television for everyone's entertainment. It was a very weird gesture. So I think there's still a case for citizen action, and I know that planning is changing as a process which should involve more consultation. I think one of the telling phrases in the film was when Fiona said community consultation was so just couldn't bother to do. Are there any other questions? Well, second. And if you hold the microphone up so that you can hear yourself.
To see whether if it's sustainable in the far if it's 15%. 1%, but I'm sure we're not going to apply to the local. So it's an experience. Another fusion. And a little bit more about it. Maybe in fact with this these buildings, we have all this attention, is that they don't have to become sustainable. We don't want people to go to the arts, and, these other things, and, they give ourselves a long time.
Oh, if I can answer a couple of those. I mean, we talked about how dynamic cities are, but buildings change as well, and uses to buildings change, and most of our work is not actually restoring the building's fabric, although that's part of it. Most of the work is identifying a new use that makes sense in an old building and then proving that it's sustainable, because if you can't prove, at least to reasonable satisfaction, that it's sustainable, no one gives you the money to restore it in any case. So actually we are building repurposers and community engagers and community builders. And most of the things we do are finding someone who will take on a building and then helping them get to a stage where, at least to reasonable satisfaction, it should be sustainable. Now, it doesn't always work. We've had to buildings which we've had to, have had to come back into a different purpose. But I think our hit rate over the years has been, most of them are sustainable. And one of the things we are doing just now as part of our 40th anniversary is to try and look at what that impact has been. What is the turnover of a charity that's been in Castlemilk Stables for multiple years and so on, and go back all those decades. And I think that's just the financial contribution, never mind the community, how it's anchored a community. These buildings have social, community and financial impact, and if you're lucky it has all three, and it's sustainable into the long term. I think most of them have been, but that's the challenge, and that's the challenge for the buildings in the city, is what their uses when a shop is no longer viable as a shop. I mean, you look around and you think, how many of them can become cafes? Is there an economic future selling coffee to each other, and I'll come at my cafe and come to your cafe today? There's a limit to that. I don't know if anyone else was.
I think what's quite interesting is a project that both David and I worked on together, David, Wasps. When the Brexit classics and Eleanor and a team of people saved the building and its fabric, and the board of that and useful we found for it. And in the early 80s, it was turned into a little shopping centre of people little sort of boutique shops and various things that are little markets. And that lasted for a period of time. And then there was a recession, and then that died away, and people sort of moved away from that part of the city. And then Wasps came in, and Wasps, as an organisation, came in artist provision. So it's created art workspaces and artist studios, and took over the main part of the building and converted it into studio space for artists. The second hall, which is the bit that was left over, was never developed, but it was done on the basis that this was going to be a phased development anyway. And that phase of the Brexit was hugely successful. It was full of artists, and it had markets and various exhibitions and events every year on the hall, and that stimulated the development of South Block, which was the corner of King Street, and then that was part of creative industries and artists. So that filled up. So it's interesting now, the Brexit, and it's almost its fourth iteration, coming back to say, actually, we've now got we've got the time, and we've got the money, and we've got the will to develop the next building, which is the 1872 launch, which is the bit that faces onto the climb. So it's the next building. So sometimes you don't need the full answer. You need to be able to have a group of people behind it. You need to have the money in order to sustain and save the original fabric. But it comes back to what Paula was saying about that idea of flexibility, being flexible in the approach to allow it to develop in its own way.
You see, I mean, it's activity in a boat house must be fairly limited because the number of people out dealing with the river is relatively small. Maybe we find other kind of events that we can help there. Without that, this is very much of the beach, right? I started with having other places that events similar to what we did in those months.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I mean, there are hundreds of people involved in rowing there. And rowing is, we've spent a number of years, 5 years working on that, and it's now fully restored. I think if it wasn't fully restored, it's a timber boathouse on the edge of a river at night in the river. We've saved a piece of heritage. It's used by hundreds of people for rowing. They've widened we all think of rowing as an elite sport for a certain type of personality, obviously, but it's actually much broader than that. And one of the things we were very conscious of, the theme of the process was a boathouse for everyone, to involve the whole community. So we engaged with the community all the way along the river, right up to the Cunningham Loop, engaging with primary schools in Kilmarnock. What was the river? Talking about the river as a living place. And we put fish back in the river, and we did all sorts of things that were trying to say a heritage project isn't just about bricks and mortar, in this case timber, but it's about the place in the community. And Glasgow Green, of course, is the core and heart of where Glasgow came from. We engaged the community that was there, yeah. So I think there's a question just behind you, if we can move on to that.
Question. The 3 points through. Glasgow's economy is one of the biggest challenges we all face in terms of moving to city, particularly. You said that the Building Preservation Trust saved 40 buildings. Sorry, 30 over 40 years, 30 over 40 years, and they're on the at-risk register. So you could do with some booster rockets potentially for the next.
Yes, please.
Scotland. And then there's a growing movement to try to reduce buildings. My question is, do you have any sense of that impetus to reuse buildings, to save carbon, and so on and so forth, potentially impacting the pace of your work and the impact of your work in the future?
I can answer that, but I don't know if anyone else wants to come in. But I think that the whole carbon economy is changing the conversation. I used to find it quite funny when you'd suddenly open external AGA and they talk about retrofit first, and you think most of us, any of us have been doing that for decades, and thank you for joining us. But the whole architectural industry used to be knock it down after 20, 30 years to make more money, particularly in the big economies. I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because it's about good news story, really. I mean, now there are some pilots, some moves have been made, which are policy related, and of course also from this point of view, legislative to some extent, which I'm suggesting that there will be definitely a tipping point in the near future where actually perhaps it will be more obvious the benefit of the closing and rather than finishing and rebuilding. So I definitely believe that is already starting to manifest itself. I don't believe that anyone is got data to support that at this point in time. But there are definitely policies which are more clear. Nick, for instance, is constantly fighting with us. It's a very asset again. And we know that we have policies from Scotland, for instance, and from the city or NPF4, which is clearly saying, demolish the build. Because that can be just going. Even when we mentioned the analysis, actually there has been 6 months of discussion about what are the options here. So before we are not covering all the options about reproposing, we are not even entertaining a conversation about knocking down the building. And that was allowed because obviously climate emergency, city development plan, there is an alignment of layers that are allowing that conversation to take place. Probably if we were going to have that same conversation on security a year ago, 2 years ago, probably the result would have been different in terms of personal relation.
I think it means that there was more of an impetus or more of a desire to look at restoring and repurposing buildings. And I think the private sector will be looking for partners involved. So hopefully opportunities for us. But obviously we've been dedicated mostly in helping communities, community organisations take on assets. So we've been very, very involved in the People Make Glasgow's communities process. But the city centre is probably not yet. But there's lots and lots of work to do, and it's a good place, good opportunities for us.
All right. I just wanted to refer back to the Golden Set project, and there's also the Avenues project. When I go into town, I love that too. When I go into town, we have an Avenues project that's beautifying the avenue, the upper parts of the street. There's roads to go. The buildings are distressed. Taking so long to take a look at what we're going to do with the art school. I'm not optimistic, and I'm glad I'm here tonight because you are very optimistic, which is wonderful. Can you talk about what the short-term or next concrete goals are for those, and what kind of impact do you think that's going to bear on the fact that we have so many buildings that are not going on the council? How do you affect that? How do you impact that? And the second question is there a city model or city models that we could look at and say, you know, I'd like more of this in Glasgow, I'd like more of that in Glasgow. How does that affect sort of the decision making for those project? I mean, Buchanan Street is okay, but going down the hill, Argyle Street awful, Suckyville Street awful, and Suckyville Street used to be the best shopping centre in Glasgow when I was growing up. And looking around, I think it's the same for some of the folk here too.
So I think the gentleman
maybe
is sharing. Yes.
Oh, no, that's all. That's right. I think the first thing one, if you get a chance, is find the link to the movie's report and have a look at this report by and look at it. And it's full of all sorts of ideas. It's very much about small movement. What can we do now? What is the medium term? And what are the very long term things that you think about talking about is, you know, next quarter and planning out, you know, they're 10, 15-year plans. They're not going to happen anytime soon. So a lot of what we were trying to do was actually go back to basics, and obviously in 1983 when Gordon Cullen came up with this idea of stringing pearls and creating a series of world-class spaces for the centre of Glasgow, we didn't envisage a monocultural retail park, which was what Glasgow ultimately became, and Glasgow's DNA, going back to the power about the DNA of cities. Glasgow saw its DNA as being the best shopping city outside the West End of London, and it built its DNA on that. And it lasted for a couple of decades, and now it's gone and it's changing. So a lot of what we were trying to do in the document was explore all sorts of options, whether it was retrofitting the VHS store, or it was looking at the site where Victoria's nightclub burnt down, or it looks at the Arsenal site, or we're very much looking at that idea of pixelating the whole city centre again, actually back to where it was. People used to live on City Hall Street, people used to live on the hill. So part of the council's ambition, 10, 15 years, is to double the city centre. Glasgow is the smallest city centre population of any major UK city. It's less than 30,000. So by doubling that, we get people back into the city centre. We've got upper floors, a lot of which are empty, primarily because the retail footprint was so valuable that they took away the staircase and they took away the close. So that is now changing because obviously that footprint is not as valuable as it used to be. So part of the challenge, and again, it's a big policy, and this is looking to change, is there's always been this UK city centre issue about having multi-uses. You know, if you go to any other European city, you see it in abundance. So you have to go over that, and you have to get to the point where you say buildings, streets are multi-use. They're commercial at the ground floor, there are offices in the first floor, there's people living up on the top, there's a nursery school on the roof, you know, whatever you want to do. So part of the challenge, and a lot of what the buildings out this thing is about, we need to start to be flexible, policies need to be relaxed, we need to allow those things to happen. And I think if those things can happen, when you begin to see some activity. I am optimistic in the sense I know of a handful of quite big projects coming forward in the Glasgow city centre that will start to change some of those things. But there are things we can do, meanwhile uses, looking at some of the spaces, whether it's King Street, or it's Simply Hill Street, or it's the Village Street, put them into pocket parks, put up festivals at weekends, during the summer, do things that bring footfall back into the city centre. It would make you and I want to go over an evening into the city centre. So there are things you can do quickly. There are medium scale things that are going to take a bit of time to change, and then there are the big things.
Thanks, Jerry. We should have scheduled more time for this. There's a good conversation to be had here, and we wanted to be part of starting that conversation, and Doors Open Day being a place where these kind of dialogues can happen. But I'm going to give the last word to
So Gavin's project, the thing we give, but it's actually completely nature. It's going to give more space to people, and as well as gives a cycle, even cycle, so that will generate and do its edges again. So that's the basis of the project. So rather than having and rather than not changing in quite fast, and with the this project, we're going to City Bank Island, but now we are really many more of those. In terms of what can you say and how can you talk to us? Well, we have developed 9 city generation frameworks across the city centre, largely in spoken to a lot of citizens to inform those plans. Also, communities in the city centre dimension, there's no community city centres. The whole of Glasgow is a community city centre because it is the centre of identity of all of the city or the city regions are the field. So we are always listening to email address, which our website. And so we're here to listen.
Awesome. Thank you very much to everyone who came. And thank you to Nuff and Jerry for contributing their thoughts. You'd like to say before we wrap up that?
Finish. Amazing before
Listen, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that, and hopefully this year, this year, and also in future it goes on. So thank you very much. I don't know that anything Stephen or that.
No, just to say thank you all again for coming. Please remember there are lots more events happening at this year's festival. There is the Scottish Jewish Heritage Society tomorrow here doing the talk, sell tickets for that. There's Local Home doing a talk about sustainable homes. And then if you want to continue the conversation, exciting projects which are happening in the city, the Preservation Trust is back here on Friday evening at 6. So enjoy the rest of the time. Thank you very much.